Thank you so much, Kaiti. And it's my pleasure to introduce our author, Vivian Conan. And Vivian Conan, her first memoir, Losing the Atmosphere. Vivian Conan is a writer and librarian who lives in Manhattan. Her work was appeared in the New York Times, New York Magazine, Lilith, Narratively, and Ducks.org. Losing the Atmosphere, a memoir, a baffling disorder, a search for help, and the therapist who understood, is her first book. Born in 1940s Brooklyn to a father prone to rage and an emotionally erratic mother, Vivian Conan grew up into different worlds, outside and inside. Outside, she had friends, excelled in school, and was close to her cousins and brothers. Inside, she saw faces that weren't hers in her bedroom mirror and was surrounded by an invisible atmosphere that bathed her in the love and understanding she craved. Told with honesty, humor, and grace, Losing the Atmosphere is a never too late story about the growth possible for anyone with guts to pursue it, and a testament to the redemptive power of love. Not the perfect kind Vivian experienced in her imaginary world, but the imperfect kind that connects us, flawed human being to flawed human being, in the real world. She lives now. It's my a great honor and a pleasure to present Vivian Conan. And I also want to say Vivian is a librarian. Also, she works in Tuckahoe Library, and she also works Bronxville and Larchmont Library.
Actually, I don't work in Larchmont anymore, but Bronx
Okay. Used to work. Okay.
before COVID anyway. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Swadish. So I'm here to talk about my book, Losing the Atmosphere. And the subtitle is A Baffling Disorder, A Search for Help and the Therapist Who Understood. And it's about living.
Okay, by the way, Vivian, let me give I forgot to give a household. Just like everyone know, am I going to mute everyone? But if you have questions, you can either unmute yourself or put in the chat box. And then, yeah, and we will, Vivian will answer you the questions along the way, okay? Okay. So I'm just going to mute everyone now.
Thank you, Kaiti. As I told Kaiti, I don't mind being interrupted with questions. So if you have questions, you put them in the chat and she'll let me know. So basically the book is about mental illness, living with it and healing from it. And specifically, it's about dissociative identity disorder, which was formerly called multiple personality disorder. And I had two diagnoses. The other one is an attachment disorder. So dissociative identity disorder, which used to be multiple personality disorder, dissociation is an internal walling off of parts of yourself to avoid painful emotion. And it's not done consciously. So like an example is, if there's a disaster or a car crash or something that happens, the people can go around doing whatever they need to do to get to safety without feeling anything. They're just like automatically do what they have to do. And their emotions don't come back until they're in a safe place. The disaster is taken care of. And now their emotions come flooding back. So there is survival value in dissociation because it enables you to do what you need to do when there's an emergency. And that's why it is adaptive at the time. So the splitting that happens from the dissociation could be a matter of hours or days or even decades. And the dissociative identity disorder is similar to that. it's similar to what happens to disaster victims. And it's also similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, people who have served in combat zones. But the difference is that in dissociative identity disorder, the trauma that usually causes it begins in childhood, and it's repeated, and it's at the hands of someone who the child depends upon for food and clothing and shelter. So a child cannot escape her external environment. She can't go and find another place to live. So she escapes internally by walling off parts of herself that have knowledge of the painful emotions and the abuse or the trauma, so that other parts of her, I'm using her, but it could be a him also, other parts are free of that knowledge, and they can function like a regular child. They can go to school and have friends, and nobody knows that anything is really the matter. So the dissociation and the splitting off is not done consciously. It's the body's natural reaction to trauma, the same way in a car crash or something, the natural reaction of the body is to cut off all feelings until you do what you have to do to get to safety. So in that sense, when it says dissociative identity disorder, it's not really a disorder. It's an adaptation. It doesn't become a disorder until later when it's no longer needed. So the way I like to describe it is, dissociation is like your immune system. When you first are exposed to some kind of illness, your immune system kicks in and it fights away the microbial intruders. The same way dissociation takes away emotion that is too intense to deal with. But once that child grows up and moves out and is no longer in that traumatic environment, there's no need anymore for those divisions, but they're so entrenched that they don't go away. And that's when it turns into a disorder. So that's when it's like an overactive immune system, when the immune system starts attacking the host instead of the microbes. So that's the way I like to describe it, because I don't like the word disorder. It's an adaptation, and it only becomes a disorder when you can't get rid of it. So the kinds of trauma that cause dissociative identity disorder could be physical trauma, sexual trauma, emotional trauma, neglect, or attachment. There are different traumas. It's most common is sexual trauma, but it doesn't have to be sexual trauma. And it also can be more than one kind of trauma. So in my case, it was attachment trauma and emotional trauma. My parents loved me, but my father was overly strict and prone to rages, and he had a force field that he tried to like mind control and make me think his way. And my mother was more what I consider normal, and approachable, but she was erratic, and she could turn on me or curse me at times. And so I did not know what was happening at the time. When you're a child and somebody is treating you a certain way, you don't ever think something is wrong with the grown-up. You think something is wrong with you, or else, because a child needs to believe that grown-ups know what they're doing, because a child cannot get food, clothing, and shelter. They're dependent on the grown-up. And if the grown-up doesn't know what they're doing, that's a really terrible thing for the child to think. So it's easier for the child to think that there's something wrong with the child than to think there's something wrong with the adult. So in my case, part of me felt that this was all my fault, but another part of me created a magic world that I called the Atmosphere. The name of the book is Losing the Atmosphere. And the Atmosphere, I was about 5, and I didn't create it on purpose. It just happened. It was like an imaginary magic world where there were the kindly adults. It was populated by kindly adults. Some of them maybe I knew, and some of them maybe I didn't know. Like it could be a fairy godmother from a fairy tale. It could be a bus driver who just happened to be nice to me and I never saw that bus driver again. It could be somebody that I knew in real life, maybe a teacher, but I made another version of that person and put them in the atmosphere. And the atmosphere people were not in bodies. They were loose molecules floating all through the air, and they surrounded me day and night, and they knew everything that I was thinking and feeling. And they didn't have to do anything to change my situation. All they needed to do was to know about it. And once they knew, that was enough. And years later, when I was doing research about dissociation and attachment, I found this term called empathic connection, empathic attunement. And empathic attunement is usually what a mother and a caregiver and a baby gets from the caregiver. Like the baby cries and the baby is hungry and milk arrives in its mouth. The baby needs a diaper change and magically the diaper gets changed. And the caregiver and the baby have some kind of attunement that the caregiver understands the baby and the baby feels understood, even though the baby doesn't have any language to describe that. So in the atmosphere, I created my own empathic attunement. Since I wasn't getting it from my parents, I got it from these imaginary people. And again, what turned out to eventually be an attachment disorder was not a disorder to begin with. It was an adaptation. It allowed me to function as a regular child and go to school and have friends and, do whatever I did because I got from these imaginary people what I wasn't getting from the real people. So that's sort of the summary of what the atmosphere is. Now, I wanted to say what it's like I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes here because I get off on a tangent. So how did the dissociation, like the dissociative identity disorder or the multiple personality disorder, how did it manifest? When I was 16, I was talking to faces in my bedroom mirror that were not my own. But I didn't necessarily know whose they were, but I would have these long conversations. They were two-way conversations. And I knew that something was not right about that. But I also knew that at times I was just a regular person. I mean, this was in the 1950s when I was a Bobby Soxer, I had friends, we giggled about our math teacher, we all had a crush on him. So part of me was a regular teenager and part of me would be talking to these faces in the mirror. And I knew that something wasn't right. And I knew that I needed to talk to a grown-up about this, but I didn't want to talk to my parents, my mother, actually. I was the only one I might have talked to. But so instead I picked my English teacher. I was in honors English, and my English teacher was also the dean of girls, and she liked me, and I felt that she was a safe person to talk to. She was also in the atmosphere, but in the atmosphere, she understood everything, but the in-person version of her did not understand unless I would talk to her. She didn't know she was in the atmosphere. She didn't know she had two versions. So I wrote her a note and I slipped it under her office door, and like after she read it, she sent for me I was in chemistry class and she sent for me. And the first thing she said was, "Are you pulling my leg?" And I was really, really upset because she didn't believe me. And she was the one person that I felt I could trust. So I snatched my letter away from her and I said, "Never mind." And I started to walk out. And then she said, "No, please, I thought you were joking. Now I see you're serious. Please come and sit down." So I did go back and talk to her, and she asked me if I would mind talking to the school psychologist. And I said that would be okay, even though I didn't really want to talk to the school psychologist. I didn't know the school psychologist. So the school psychologist was not very, she was more scared of me than, and she just said, she didn't know what to say to me. And she said, "Oh," she said, "is this getting in the way of your schoolwork?" I said, "No." I mean, it was the most ridiculous question. So she didn't know what to say to me. So she sent me back down to the dean. And the dean said that I could come talk to her anytime. And I made her promise that she wouldn't tell my mother. And I went home feeling much better because now a grown-up knew and a grown-up I trusted. Well, when my mother got home from work, when I got home from school, my mother was already home from work. And my mother said she got a call from the dean, and the dean said that I talked to faces in the mirror, what's going on? And I felt really betrayed. But in a way, it was good because my mother, I didn't told her I didn't want to talk about it. So my mother was a doer. She wasn't someone who talked about things, but she took action whenever there was something to do. So she came to me a few hours later and she gave me a piece of paper and said she made an appointment with a psychoanalyst who works with children. And my appointment is next Tuesday, and here's the address, and I should go after school. That was it. She gave me this appointment. So, I mean, at that time, it was the mid-1950s, and psychoanalysis was considered fashionable, and it was not a stigma to be in analysis. It was like all the famous actors and actresses were in analysis. So I didn't mind telling my friends that I was gonna go see this psychoanalyst. So she became my first therapist. Her name was Dr. Hirschhorn. And what happened there, and I didn't know at the time about the dissociative identity disorder, but I was a pretty loud teenager. I used to laugh, we used to go out to eat with my friends. I would laugh and tell jokes, but as soon as I went into the office of Dr. Hirschhorn, I got so scared and I became mute and I couldn't talk. And I did not feel like a teenager. I felt like a 6-year-old scared child, and that she was a big grown-up and very intimidating for me. And what I would come to understand many years later when I knew about the dissociative identity disorder is that this was a 6-year-old part. I don't like to call them alter personalities. I call them parts. This was a 6-year-old part of me who really longed for a mother. I came to know later that her name was Emily, but I did not know that at the time. And all I knew was that I was so scared to talk to her that the only thing I could say was, "I don't know." And she tried a lot of things. She tried bringing me presents. She tried letting me play with the toys in her toy room. I wound up seeing her for about 4 years. And all that time, I really didn't say anything more than "I don't know," except that after a year or so, when I was at home and I wasn't switched into this little child, I would write her letters of things that I would have told her in the sessions. And I brought the letters to the sessions and I would hand them to her in the beginning of the session, and she would read them. And the letters were things that probably I should have been talking to her about, but they were all down on paper. And after she read them, she would try to talk to me about them, but the me sitting opposite her was not the me who wrote the letters. So that never worked. So it was very frustrating for her, and it was very frustrating for me. But the reason that I kept going back was that I also had a version of her in the atmosphere. And the 1 hour a week that I saw her in person that I did not get along with her at all, that was 1 hour. But the rest of the week, all the rest of the days of the week, I had a perfect version of her in the atmosphere, and I thought she understood me 100%. So I did not know, I knew about the atmosphere at the time, but I did not know about the other people. But I never told her about the atmosphere because it never occurred to me that it was something to mention. Just as I wouldn't mention to someone that I breathe in and out 5 times a minute, because it's just part of me. So that was so much part of me that I never mentioned it to her. And I didn't think it was strange that I had 2 versions of her either. I was just used to that. So I'm trying to not lose my story there. So she was just the first of several therapists. I went to college. I went to Brooklyn College. I had friends. I stopped seeing Dr. Hirschhorn after 4 years, and I thought I would be fine without a therapist. But then I started feeling very anxious, and I started not being okay, and I knew I needed another therapist, and I did not want my mother to pick it out. I didn't want my mother to know. So I talked to one of my friends, and she said that her psychology professor was also a therapist, and that she thought I would like him, and that I could come and sit in on her class and see what he was like and then decide. So I did that, and I liked him, and so I made an appointment with him, and he became my therapist for the next 4 years. He was much easier for me to talk to, and I did not find him intimidating. And because of that, I let my guard down in the sessions, and I let what I now know is child parts and baby parts of myself out. And I would talk in nonsense syllables, and I wouldn't always be coherent. And I thought that he understood me perfectly, and I had no idea that he was very flummoxed and didn't understand what was going on. And he eventually had me hospitalized, which the misdiagnosis in the hospital was schizophrenia. And it turns out that was not the case, but nobody really understood what was then called multiple personality at the time. So that's basically what happened. I was in the hospital 3 times and out 3 times. And in between, I went to school, I got a career, and I did okay. So I was really basically okay until my 40s, when I was with my 5th therapist. And then I had a lot of personal things happen to me. I mean, I was in sort of like remission for a while until my 40s. I had a very bad breakup with a boyfriend, and I found out I was pregnant, and I had an abortion, and my whole world fell apart, and all the things that were hidden in me or cut off from me that had nothing to do with the breakup with the boyfriend or the abortion, they all came rushing back. And it wouldn't go away. Like about 6 or 7 years after that, I was still always in crisis. And my therapist at the time, I call her Mary Beth in the book. That's not her real name. She said to me, I don't understand. There's nothing really traumatic going on in your life right now, but you're always in distress. And I said at that time, a book had just come out about reincarnation. I think it was called The Search for Bridey Murphy. I'm not sure. But I read it, and I said, well, maybe I felt like there were people in me, but I didn't know what it was. So I said, well, maybe maybe I'm reincarnated and all these souls of these people are what's making me upset. And she said, oh, don't be silly. There's no such thing as reincarnation. So I, you know, I didn't know what to say. And that weekend, I was that was the time when the videos were in VCR tapes and you had to rent them from the store. You couldn't, you know, and then you rented it for like 3 days and returned it. So I was in the VCR store looking for a movie to watch over the weekend. And I saw the video of Sybil. Sybil is the story of the woman who has 16 personalities. It's based on a true story. And I had read the book years before, but I never connected it with myself. But I was looking for a good movie and it looked like it was good. So I took it home and I watched it. And after I watched it, or while I was watching it, I started to understand that maybe this is what was going on with me. But it was such a preposterous notion because at the time, there were only 2 famous cases of multiple personality. And one was the 3 Faces of Eve, and one was Sybil. And there was it was considered very, very rare. And I've since found out that it's not rare at all. It's much, much more prevalent than people think. But it was so preposterous. And yet it was the only thing when I look back on my life that made sense for all the different things that had happened to me. So the next time I saw my therapist, I asked her if she thought there could be other people in me. And she said yes. But she didn't have any experience with multiple personality. And I brought the movie into a session and we watched it together. And after that, she felt that if I did have multiple personality disorder, that's what it was called at the time, the way to deal with it was to force me to be one person and to ignore all the other ways that I talked or all the other behaviors that I had. And so she was, we wound up at loggerheads, and she was my 5th therapist. So then I went to another one, and it wasn't until my 7th therapist that I found somebody who was experienced in treating multiple personality disorder and who confirmed the diagnosis and who also figured out that I had an attachment disorder also. And unless the attachment disorder was addressed, the multiple personalities could not be addressed because they were the result of the attachment problem. So that's sort of a summary of my story. I wrote the book, I purposely wrote the book in what's called real time, which means the reader doesn't know anything before I know it. I didn't know it, I didn't write it from as if with a narrator who knows what the story is. When I was 5 years old and 6 years old and 7 years old, the reader knows what I know when I'm 5, 6, and 7. There's no older me that's coming back and layering meaning on it. So it reads like a medical mystery. And as I'm trying to figure it out, the reader is figuring it out with me. I don't let the reader know what I knew later, although from reading the blurbs, the reader could figure it out. But I could talk more, or I could open this to questions. I mean, I have a lot of other things I could say, but if anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Anyone have any questions or comments?
How long did it take you to write the book?
Oh, that's a whole story. It took me 25 years to write this book. I started when I was 50 and I finished when I was 75. And I was not the same person when I finished writing it that I was when I started. When I started writing it, actually, when I started writing it, my intention was not to write a book. It was to write an article, like a long article, maybe the length of the New York Times Magazine articles. And it was not supposed to be, I wasn't planning for it to be so much about me as how hard it was to live in the world and go to work and go to the supermarket and just live a regular life when you had what was then called multiple personality disorder. And it was a very stigmatized thing. You had to hush hush, like I didn't want anyone at work to know. I didn't want my friends to know. So I wanted to write the articles so that the world would see that people with multiple personality disorder are just regular people. They're not what's sensationalized in the media. So I enrolled in a writing workshop. And when it was the first time that I came out of the closet in public to people who were not clinicians. And I was surprised at the reaction of the people. A writing workshop, for people who don't know, you bring in your chapter or your essay, everybody brings in their own work, and the whole class, which is about 15 people plus an instructor, they read it and they comment on it and they tell you what works, like this part is very interesting, this part was more boring, if you add dialogue here it will be better, I want to know more about this, or this is too overwritten. So I brought in my draft essay, and I was really surprised that the people said, we don't want to know the generic, we want to know more about you. This is fascinating. So I was really surprised at that. And my next draft, I put more of myself in, and they said, this is good, but we want even more of you. And why don't you write a book? And that's the first time I ever thought of writing a book. So I did wind up writing an article. It was published in New York Magazine, but I published it under a pseudonym. I was not ready to come out of the closet to the whole world yet. And after the article came out, I was working on the book. When I started working on the book, I thought it was only about the multiple personality disorder. I did not know about the attachment disorder because I was still in therapy at the time. So the book changed. The book changed as I was writing it. And also people who read the book ask me usually two questions. One is, was it painful to relive everything again? And the second is, how did I remember so many details? And the answer to both questions is dissociation, because it was not painful to remember everything, because the writer part of me is cut off from the rest of me. So writing a book is not like writing a journal. Writing a journal, you spill out your guts, and you could be very happy, you could be very sad, you could be grieving, and it's not shaped, you just spill it out onto the page. But when you're writing a memoir that other people are going to read, you need to shape it, and you need to organize it and put it in some kind of way that people will understand it. So I have to be the writer part of me that's doing that. And so dissociation helped me in that way. Step out. The barriers in dissociation, they're not always like total barriers. There could be co-consciousness, and there could be sharing of memories or feelings, one in one direction or more than one direction. So that's what helped me write the book. And as far as how did I remember so many details, that's also from dissociation, because the mechanism of dissociation in dissociative identity disorder is that there's a frozen in time quality to it. So if there's a 6-year-old who was traumatized, and that 6-year-old is still with me when my body is 50 or 60 years old, that 6-year-old is frozen in time. Like her memories are the memories from the 1950s when I was there, when I was actually in the 1950s. So in that sense, the dissociation helped me write the book. Now that I'm much more blended and much more healed and not so dissociated, I could not write that book now. I can read it and I know that everything in it is true, but I cannot dissociate and split myself off as much now as I used to do. And so I couldn't write that book now. Actually, so the disorder that I was writing about was actually helpful in writing the book. So that's a very long answer to your question of how did it take to write my book. Is there any other questions?
I saw Carolyn, you were unmute yourself earlier. Do you have a question to ask? Carolyn?
I had a question, but she answered it.
Oh, I see.
Okay, so
Okay.
yeah, I struggle with some issues myself. You know, I have a cochlear implant. You know, so I have my issues, and I was trying to think maybe I should share my story. But I'm not sure. You know, I'm a little shy on that end, so I'll think about it.
I mean, it's very hard to come out of the closet to something that you're trying to hide from people or that you feel is a stigma. You meaning not you personally, but you in general. Like if and I was really afraid to do that, which is why I published the first article in New York Magazine under a pseudonym. And I was even writing this book under a pseudonym, and it wasn't until maybe 10 or 12 years into writing it that I decided to write it under my own name. And once I changed all my pseudonym was Laura. Once I changed all the Lauras to Vivian, and I changed most of the names of the other people to their real names. There are a few that I didn't. I felt so much different about my story. I felt like I owned it, and something changed for me. It gave me much more dignity when I put my own name on it, but I also know that it's very hard to do that. And the other thing is about being shy about writing. That's how I felt in the workshop. And the workshop was very helpful to me. I took the same workshop for 25 years. It's a 10-week course, and I kept re-upping with the same instructor for 25 years. And the people in the workshop changed over time. Like some of the 15 people originally, maybe 10 would re-up the next time. So I knew 10 and 5 were new. And so over the course of the 25 years, I got to meet a lot of people. I got to hear a lot of different stories. I'm the longest one in that workshop. I'm the only one who was there for 25 years. So now I met a community of writers, and I have a network of writers. And now when I see them, they'll ask me, oh, who's still in the class? And I say, well, I don't remember which year you were in, but I'll tell you who's in it now, and you see. But what I found in the workshop was that not everybody was writing memoir, but the people who were writing memoir, you get to know them much faster than you would if you met them at a cocktail party, because they're bringing in very personal stories and they're sharing them in a safe environment, but it's not a therapy environment. So when people ask you, like at one point, I wrote something and it said that I did not feel human. And so somebody in the workshop said, well, you say that you didn't feel human. You say that you didn't feel human. Did you think other people were human? And like, if that was a question in a conversation over dinner, it would be a breach of boundaries. But in the workshop, it's not, because the other people in the workshop are just trying to figure out what I'm trying to say and help me say it better. And I do the same thing for them. Like I ask them questions, or I say, this is not clear. And so you wind up getting to know people really well. And some of them you could become friends with outside of the workshop, and some you don't. But there's an unspoken rule in the workshop that nothing that is presented there is shared with anyone. Like if you can share it if you get permission. Like if someone says, oh, I really like this and I think my wife would really relate to it, do you mind if I show it to my wife? Then I could say yes, or I could say no. So the rule in the workshop is that you respect someone's privacy, and if you want to share it, you can ask if you can share it. So I understand about feeling shy, and I was super, super shy about this. And the workshops were so invaluable to me to help me get over that.
And also, is it also the librarian in you that wanted to share this story? Because I'm a librarian too. And so, you know, the need for information and to share, you know, so that's within me also.
I mean, I can't tell you what to do, but I would encourage you, if you feel like writing, to write. And you could just write for yourself. And if you don't like how it's coming out, just write something. I'm also, or I was before COVID stopped this, a mentor in this organization called Girls Write Now. Write is WRITE. And I live in New York City, and I live in Manhattan. And this organization pairs teenage girls from underserved neighborhoods who want to write with a woman writer as a mentor. So I had two mentees. I had one for 3 years when she was in high school, sophomore, junior, senior. Then when she graduated, I got my second mentee, and I had her for 4 years, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And what I used to tell those girls is that you can't edit you can't edit nothing. So even if it's terrible, if you don't like, you need to write something, and then you could edit it. If you think it's terrible, at least it's a sentence on the page and you can edit it. But if you just say like, oh, I can never write, there's no way you could fix it. So that kind of helped them. And also, when I was being interviewed even though the mentor is a volunteer job, there was a very strict interview, and security checks as if I was a teacher. So when I was being interviewed for this, the interviewer said, what would you do if your mentee came to you and said, oh, I'll never be a writer. Everything I write is terrible. I'll never be a writer. And I just laughed at the interviewer, and I said, my first draft stinks. My second draft stinks. It doesn't get better till the 5th or 6th or 7th draft. So don't worry, So apparently that answer was okay, because I did become a mentor. But I would say to you that if you want to write, try it out. You don't need to go to a workshop. Just try out yourself, and see what comes out. But don't say, you don't have to be shy with yourself. You only have to be shy if you're showing it to someone else.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't mean to tell you what to do, but I just want to encourage you. That's all.
No, I understand that. It was very thoughtful. And thank you.
You're welcome.
And Vivian, there's another question from Charlotte. Are you still in touch with your other selves?
Yes and no. Like they're much more blended and much more in the background. In general, no, but if I get upset about something, that was a coping mechanism, and my coping mechanism will come back to help me, but it'll help me for like a couple of hours or a day, and then so it's there in the wings if I need it, but it's not here all the time. in general.
Okay. Any other questions?
You feel you were able to go on and live a happy life even with this struggle?
I'm very happy right now. It took a while, but you know, the thing with dissociation is that it's not horrible all the time, because the parts of you, when the parts of you that are dissociated, the little sliver of you that's not dissociated could be okay. But right now, I'm 78 years old now, and I am in a very good place. I never had children or got married because of this, and I do miss that, but I have 3 wonderful nephews and I have a grandnephew and a grandniece. And during COVID, I have a Monday play date with my 4-year-old grandnephew. Every Monday, I bought Lego, we build together. I build in my house on Zoom and he builds in his house on Zoom, and we look at each other's stuff. And I am still singing in a choir. We're having Zoom rehearsals, which is a little bit strange, but it does work. And I would say that because I am where I am now, if I had to be in a COVID lockdown before I got better, it would have been very hard because I was already isolated. But because I now have many more real connections with real people and not, I don't have the atmosphere people anymore. I made these connections with real people before COVID happened. So now I could connect with them on Zoom, or I could go for a socially distanced walk in Central Park. But if I had not made relationships with people before COVID, it would have been very hard to make them after COVID. So yeah, I do feel I'm in a good place now.
That's good. I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you.
I have a question too.
Okay, Rosa, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. And thank you so much, Vivian, for your sharing the book and you're talking now. I have a question about if you couldn't have a therapist, what you doing that time?
If I didn't have a therapist,
Exactly.
I'm still seeing a therapist. There was the only time in my life that I didn't see a therapist. I mean, I started when I was 16. The only time after that was for some reason, after one of my therapists died, who I really liked actually, I was okay for about 5 or 6 years. I did not see a therapist, and that's when I had the boyfriend and the breakup and everything. But I never really had a chunk of my life, except for those years where I didn't see a therapist. I don't know what's behind your question. Are you asking me personally, or if somebody has the same condition that I had, if they don't have a therapist, what would they do? I'm not sure which part of the question you want me to answer.
Yeah, no, my question is if right now, you back in that time and you haven't chance to have a therapist in that age, what will you want to do?
Okay, I understand.
You can't, you continue like to talk with the mirror or yourself or no?
Yeah, I probably would have. And as a matter of fact, I did up until my last therapist, because it's something that was helpful when I was a child. It was no longer helpful when I was an adult, but I couldn't get rid of it. And since these therapists were not skilled in treating what was the matter with me, I still had the atmosphere and I still had the other people up until this last therapist. So even though I was in therapy, it would have been the same as if I wasn't. The only thing that was helpful to me that I was in therapy was that I felt that I had somebody who cared about me. And it was sort of like a crutch, but I needed that.
Thank you so much. And I love that part you talking about the childhood whole part of the life. The the kid think is himself problem, is not the adult problem. I love that part.
Right, the child always blames the child. The child blames him or herself.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have to say, Vivian, I am listening to the book. It's very well written. And I just feel it like you are right there when I'm listening to it. So,
Thank you, Swadish.
you know,
So my book is available in audiobook and in paperback, and soon it will be an ebook, but right now it's not. And in the Westchester Library System, the paperback is available and the audiobook is on Overdrive, and it's also on Hoopla. Hoopla never has a waiting list. Overdrive sometimes has a waiting list. And you could also find out more information. I have a website. It's called vivianconan.com. That's VIVIANCONAN.com. And you can read the first 4 chapters for free, on my website. And you can also see other information. Like I've been doing some like podcast interviews and stuff, and you can hear those or look at those on my website.
Vivian,
are you planning to write another book or different subject or anything?
I'm 78. I don't think I have another book, but I am writing some articles now.
Okay.
About things like the people who have asked me, like, it was it painful to write my book, or some people ask me who wrote my book, like which one of me wrote my book. So I'm writing little articles like that I hope to publish, but I don't think that I'm going to do another book.
No, not on this subject, but I know you love to write, so I thought maybe another fiction or something.
Yeah, I guess I could. People are asking me that a lot. If I knew when I started this book that it was going to take me 25 years, I would not have started. Each time I thought, oh, I'm going to finish in 6 months and 6 months, and that's what kept me going. So I don't know, but thanks for the thought.
And how long it took you to publish?
That took another couple of years. Nobody wanted. First of all, I write too much. My original book was 200,000 words. The book as it is now is 147,000. So some people don't write enough and some write too much. It's better. My writing teacher always said it's better to write too much because you can always cut away what you don't need. If you don't write enough, you don't know what you need to put there. So when I finished the book, it was 200,000 words, and they told me it shouldn't really be more than 170,000 or 150,000. So I hired an editor that I paid to cut it down. She cut it down to like 137,000. I put 10,000 words back to 147,000, and I showed it to her again. I said, I think the story needs these chapters that you took out. So she looked at it and she said it was okay. So that's the version that is now. Then I had to try to find an agent and try to find a publisher. And that was very, very, very hard. I finally did find an agent, but every place she submitted it to, whether they were small independent presses or the big ones like Random House, I got glowing rejections like, this is really interesting, but we don't know how we could position it. Or this is well written, but we just did a book like this last year and we don't want to be pegged as just doing books like this. So I eventually came back to Greenpoint Press is run by the New York Writers Workshop, and the New York Writers, it's called New York Writers Resources. And under New York Writers Resources is New York Writers Workshop and Greenpoint Press and Prison Rights. They go into to Ossining Prison and Rikers, and they run workshops for the prisoners. So I asked Greenpoint Press, it's a nonprofit press, and they don't do any publicity. And they don't do something else. I forgot what. So I said, will you publish my book? And they said, yes, but they don't do publicity. And I forgot what else they don't do. But since nobody else wanted the book, I said, I went with Greenpoint Press. And so then I hired my own publicist. And that's why when it came time to produce the audiobook, I asked Greenpoint Press if they minded if I made an audiobook, and they said no. So that's when I found my own narrator. You will love this narrator, Cassandra Campbell. She won a lot of awards for her narration. So yeah, the publishing process was a process in itself.
Yeah.
Judy, you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to say that I listened to the book with Cassandra Campbell. It was excellent. I enjoyed reading it, and then I enjoyed again listening to it. It was wonderful. And I enjoyed your talk tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Judy.
Yes. I agree with you, Judy, on this. Because I think you picked the right person, the right narrator. So it was.
Yeah. I have a comment to make myself. I feel like it's a very encouraging kind of work, because we all want to present ourselves as we are a very good person in the whole world. But sometimes we hesitate to show our real self. And when we will have progress, it's only when we show our real self, then we can progress from that point. So I was just wondering, do you feel like you do progress after you read the book, after you write the book?
Thank you, Kaiti. Yes, the process of coming out of the closet. Hold on a minute. I'm choking on the dry air here.
No, me too. My room is so hot as well.
At first I was very, very hesitant to come out of the closet because it was the scariest thing for me. But I'm finding that people's responses are positive, much more positive and much more accepting than I would have thought in the beginning. And so it did change me. It made me feel not proud of my story, but it made me feel that I am a substantial person and I am worthwhile, and that people want to know about me. And it really, it did make me feel better about myself. Yes, it was a very interesting process.
Thank you so much. It's very encouraging.
Thank you.
Anyone else has questions? Or Vivian, you have anything else you think that you can share with us?
No, but I'm so happy that you all came and that you listened to me. You are the question you just asked me, how does it feel to share? Each time I do it, I feel a little better. So you made me feel a little better.
Glad to know that.
Yeah.
Vivian, I just want to thank you. This is Robin Cohen. I really enjoyed your book, and hearing you speak, it helped a lot. I just started taking some writing classes, and getting to the honesty of it, which I don't even have my picture on right now, but getting to the honesty of it is really what it's all about, like really talking about what I'm feeling. And I think you're a great role model. Thanks, Vivian.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Yeah,
Vivian, if I may speak up.
This is Charlotte.
Charlotte speaking. I admire your courage. and putting this all down on paper for everybody to share your life history with you. And it beneficial to yourself and beneficial to anybody who might read it or listen to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Yeah. And okay. Anything else? Anyone else want to make comment or no? Yeah. Okay. Vivian, thank you so much for the great encouragement, honest, that you really set an example for me. I'm speaking for myself. Yeah, because yeah, I think we really need, when we make progress, when we really honestly facing who we are ourselves at that point, and then we can go from that point to the next point. Yeah, I think that's very encouraging book that you showing to all of us. Okay, so if no one is going to ask any question, maybe we should end the section today.
Kaiti, I just want to say thank you, Vivian, very, very much. We really appreciate. It was such a pleasure. And as you work in Tuckahoe Library worked, like hopefully we will, you will come back when everything goes back to normal. It's such a pleasure, working with you, and by reading your book, I felt like, I don't know, you are with me when I'm listening to your book.
Thank you so much, Swadish. And yes, when
Pleasure.
COVID is over, I would love to come back. So yes, you have not seen the last of me.
Okay. And we want to say thank you to everybody who joined us tonight.
Thank you so
And
much.
but in the end of the section, I just want to let you know that Tuckahoe Library also have a memoir writing program. It's a very good program. I participate a few times. People share their story. I see each month we have a thing and people write about it. There are some very beautiful story during the memoir workshop. And just like Vivian say that each other just trying to help each other to write, to express what they want, really trying to express better. It's a very beautiful workshop. So if you are interested, you are welcome to join as well. Okay. Thank you very much. Everyone have a great evening, and thank you, Vivian. Greatly appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you so
everyone.
much.
Have a good night.
But one question, Vivian.
Yes.
I don't know. It could is possible have your contact?
You can go to my website. There's a contact. You can write to me at vivian@vivianconan.com, or you could go to my website. There's a contact form. You just fill it out and I get the email.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Norma. Thank you, Robin and Judy. Nice to see everyone here, and Charlotte. Charlotte, you're still in contemplation. What are you contemplating?
Thank you for hosting this event.
You're welcome.
Well done. Well done indeed.
Charlotte, you are
Really.
thinking about writing a story of yourself?
When does that memoir club meet?
First Tuesday of the month.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go to the library website, the calendar, you will be able to see it. It's first Tuesday at 1 p.m. That's where first Tuesday of each month at 1 p.m. that we meet.
Thank you so much.
No problem. All right, Vivian, thank you. Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you so much, the library, Swedish, Kaiti, and everyone. Thank you so much.
Stay well, everyone.